or 7th.
I see.
I don't remember exactly.
You did it on your own and you were assisting, right?
Right.
Both ways.
Both ways.
Okay. Now we can go.
Okay. Do I have to look straight or not necessarily?
More or less here between you talk to me,
Okay.
talk to her,
Okay.
and we. Okay, I'll keep my hand down. All right. You may start right now.
Okay, my name is Ruth Fenton. I was born in Poland, and the following story is a tragic part of my life during the Holocaust. The city I was born is a suburb of one of the biggest cities, industrial cities in Poland, Lodz. The city where I lived was Brzeziny by Lodz. I was born to a very nice family. It was a very warm home. I had 2 brothers. And the years were passing by in a very warm atmosphere. My great-grandfather started a big industry in the same city, and the city became known all over the world. They were manufacturing men's clothing to send out to export.
Would you also tell us your original name, your family, before you married?
Yeah, I will finish this.
Yes.
The business was so successful that it became a tremendous industry, and the whole city was involved in this industry. There were tailors and manufacturers. So we used to have always people coming from all over Poland to my father, buying wholesale clothes for their stores. And they always had discussions. People were invited to our house for dinner, and we always had discussions about politics, about different things, what was going on in the world. Shortly before the war, starting 1933, I was a young girl, I used to hear already what was going on in Germany, what was done to Jews. Jews were deported, Jews were humiliated, their property was confiscated. We knew what was going on, but we never realized what can happen to us. And really, the story which I'm going to tell started September 1st, 1939. This was when the Nazis invaded Poland. I was a teenage girl. I didn't know what to expect. I was very scared. One of my oldest brothers was drafted to the Polish army, and I was with my older brother at home, and we were all worried very much. When the war started, September 1st, 1939, our city was bombed for 3 days. And we were hiding in cellars, and from the blasts, when it all ended, we were all deaf for a few days. Half of the city was burned down, and a lot of people were killed. It was a terrible silence when the German Wehrmacht marched in. It was very quiet. Everybody was very, very scared. We were trembling. And we had reasons to do it because the next day everything started with the Jews. Every day was something else. They were catching people to very humiliating work. They arrested a lot of wealthy people, intellectuals. Food started to be scarce. And people were running away because we could still go, we could still go from city to city. It was such a chaos, and we didn't know what to do. We just sit there. And this lasted for several months. Towards the end of 1939, a law came out for the Jews. We all had to live in one section of the city. They made a curfew We cannot go out after 5 o'clock. And people had to move in, some families, 2 families to one apartment and share the same kitchen. And from day to day it got worse as far as food is concerned. After we moved into the ghetto, they established factories, and we all had to work making uniforms, parachuting uniforms for the German Wehrmacht. We worked from 1940 till spring 1942. We didn't have any news, we didn't have any papers. The radios we had to turn in, and we really didn't know what's going on. We were isolated from the whole world. But I have to go back. Is it okay? It's very important. Now, before they closed the ghetto, the most horrible atrocities happened. They built a scaffold in the middle of the square, and they hanged 14 young Jews. The whole Jewish populations, children, women, older people, crippled, everybody had to go out and watch this. The bodies were hanging for 3 days, and they took pictures of it. And it was just horrible to describe our feelings when we saw this, what was going on. After this, they burned down the most beautiful synagogue in our town. The synagogue was built during the times of the Tsar by Italian artisans. And it
Excuse me, during the times of what?
The times of the Tsar.
The Tsar?
Yeah.
Would you explain?
Russia, the Russian Tsar.
Or Russian Tsar?
The Tsar, right. We call it Tsar.
Tsar.
Yeah.
Now, approximately what year was that?
I don't know. I wasn't alive at this time. I don't know. Before World War I.
Yes.
And the synagogue was the cradle of our civilization there. And we were very, very hard and terrible. It was a terrible shock to the whole Jewish population. And this is the first time I saw my father crying when this happened. And shortly after this, they started with the ghetto. So we stayed in the ghetto for 2 years. We worked. We didn't have enough food already. In 1942, they asked us to leave the apartment, and they assembled us outside, and they took us to a different ghetto, to Ghetto Lodge. We had to leave everything behind us just to take a little luggage which we could carry. When we came to Ghetto Lodge, it was a terrible thing to see people walking around, very swollen people, very skinny people. Before the war, Lodge had 650,000 population, and when we came there were 100,000 Jews. They assembled people from different cities around Lodge. So there were no more ghettos left. The only ghetto left was Ghetto Lodge. It was part of the city, and it was also curfew, and we all had to go to work. A few months after we were in Ghetto Lodge, one day they surrounded the whole neighborhood where we used to live, and we all had to go out, and they grabbed people at random. At this time they grabbed my father, and I never saw him anymore in my life. And later on we didn't know where they went. We didn't have the slightest idea. We just knew after the war that they took him to the concentration camp. To which one we don't know. Presumably Helmno or Auschwitz. From 1942 till 1942, we worked and the food situation was terrible. We had about 800 calories a day. We were terribly hungry all the time. It came to the point I was eating radish leaves and all kinds of pills, which really hurt the stomach, but we just ate anything we could get a hand of.
You mean peels?
Peels, right.
Peels, like potato peels.
Potato peels was a luxury.
Yeah.
This you had to get a special permit. But we ate all kinds of peels. And I had some of my friends coming to get a lodge, and they all died there, the majority from hunger, one by one. In August 1944, they asked us again, the way it was organized, each factory had to come a certain day to a square, and they told us they are going to send us out to work in Germany. At this time I was with my mother, because my father was gone already. This was August 28, 1944. And I was with my mother, and we went with this transport to the train, cattle trains. It was terrible hot. They packed in so many people we couldn't breathe. And really, being in the cattle train, we kind of felt that something horrible is going to happen to us. We didn't know what. On one hand, we thought, well, they cannot do anything to us. I mean, they did everything what they could already. They will send us to work, and we will work, and somehow we will survive. But little did we know, we really didn't know a thing what was going to be. It took about 2 days or 3 days, I can't recall exactly, to come to Auschwitz. And while the train was moving very slow, people were fainting and people were hungry, and there were not sanitary conditions like toilets. And it was a terrible mess. It just was horrible. We didn't know. The train was going slow and slow and slow. We did not have the slightest idea what directions we are going. Finally, we were coming close to a place. We saw miles and miles and miles and miles of electric wires. So many fences, high fences of electric wires. 100 and 100 and 100 little bungalows, all the same. Bungalows, electric wires, all flat land, all dry, no tree, nothing. And suddenly we saw thousands and thousands and thousands of people. They didn't look like people. They looked very strange. We couldn't figure out what it is. What kind of objects. They had, they were bald-headed, like their hair would be shaved off. They didn't have clothes, just striped uniforms, and some were some rags. And the majority of them were barefooted. They looked terribly strange. We didn't know what it is. They didn't look like animals, but they didn't look like people. We couldn't figure out. And finally, the train stopped, and some people in these stripes, but very husky guys. It seems these people were there already for many years. They were dressed, I mean, they had shoes, and they looked pretty husky, pretty good. And they came over, SS-men came over with dogs and with whips, and they started to scream, "Get out fast, get out, and leave all your belongings. Leave all your belongings. You cannot take a thing with you." Right away we knew something worse is going to happen. It was a terrible chaos. Children were crying, and the crippled people couldn't move around. And the other people just were shocked with all this, and terrible, tired from this horrible trip. Then they started to walk us. They started to walk us, walk. And then we saw some green grass and flowers, and we heard an orchestra was playing. And they took us to some little buildings. They said they are going to give us, we have to take showers to get clean, and they will give us different clothes.
The orchestra, were the people also dressed in these uniforms, or were they dressed differently? The orchestra people, do you remember?
Also in uniforms, yeah. They were from far away, but you could hear some marches playing. It was not a concert, like a march orchestra plays, and you saw green, green lawns, little flowers, bushes of flowers here and there, scattered some trees, especially around where we went to the showers. But before we went, they made 2 lines. And it seems we didn't know what these lines mean at all. And my last word to my mother was, in Polish, I said, if they will separate us, in case they will separate us, so please don't worry. We will work and the war will end, and then we will be together. We're going to work, so let's not worry now. And while we came to the line, immediately I was separated from my mother. And then she went with, I was glad, she's going with people I know. There was a lady who worked with me in the ghetto in the office with her little girl. There were some other few people. Mothers with children, older people. Big lines. And when they separated me from my mother, I walked over to a young assessment who was standing with a machine gun, and I said, please, let me go to the other line with my mother. And I cried terrible. And I begged him. Then he took the machine gun to my head. He said, get away, get to the other line. And I didn't have any choice. I went to the line where they put me to. And then they marched us to the place where we were supposed to take the shower. But before we came in, there were already young women which were prisoners before we came from Czechoslovakia and Hungary. And they stood there with scissors, and right away they cut off our hair completely erased. And then we took the shower, and then they give us some old torn clothes. I got an old torn dress, no shoes, nothing. And all of us got the same treatment. Some got a better dress, some a worse. They just threw at your rack. And this was end of August, and it started already to be cool there, because fall starts in September. And I started to worry terrible, because if I won't have shoes and it will be so cold, I won't survive there. So anyhow, there was a man there, and he came over. He was there a longer time, and he came over to a friend of mine. We were together. He knew her from back home, and he says, well, I'm so sorry to hear what happened to your parents, and the people which came, he told us right away, the ones which went to the other line, they are going to the gas chamber. You will never see them anymore in your life. And so we said, can you help us maybe with a pair of shoes, anything? So he gave me and her a pair of shoes. And then they marched us to the block. I was on block 20. The block was one of this little barrack, a barrack which can take 200 people at least when they are squeezed in. There was no floor, just cement, or everything bare. In the middle they had something built like a long stove. And there was one woman in charge. She was one of the ex-prisoners. And if anybody did not obey the rules, just to behave and not to go out by themselves, there were all kinds of rules. And if anybody did not obey the rules, they were laid on this stove, and they were whipped.
They were whipped by her?
Yes. Now, at night, we were all laying on the cement floor, and they threw us very thin little cover blankets, but they were so thin and so shabby, so 5 people had to cover themselves with one of these blankets, and everybody was pulling a corner. But somehow, you know, in tragedy, people try to help each other. You know, it was not like one would take the half blanket or something, the other they should fight. No, it was very quiet. Everybody tried to do the best they can. And then in the morning they woke us up 5 o'clock. It was still dark, and we had to get out, and they call it celapel. They used to count us. It was just a routine of humiliation, of degradation, or to make the people suffer, because it was not necessary. What is there to count? Who can run away there? We were there, and this is it. But they had to count if everybody is inside. And this was going on through the whole camp. So in the morning it used to be like in the army barracks. Everybody had to go out in front of his barrack, and there were hundreds and hundreds of barracks, and thousands and thousands and thousands of these prisoners were standing outside. No uniform, nothing, just in these clothes which they gave us. And the SS people were walking around, and then they had secretaries, former prisoners, and they were writing, this in this block, this so many people, and this, I couldn't look in what they wrote, but I presumed. And we were standing, and standing, and standing, and standing, and it was very cold, horrible. It was so cold that we had to stay with our back to each other. We were warming each other this way. So they counted and counted and counted and counted, and sometimes there was a mistake, or somebody was inside, maybe a person was ill, they were not able to go out, but I don't know what was the reason. If in one of these barracks, in front of these barracks, the figure was not right, we had to stay, sometimes for hours. Hours and hours and hours and counting. After this we went back in, and they brought some watery soup, and we were eating the soup. And then when we wanted to go to the restrooms, we couldn't go on our own, we had to go in groups, always with groups. And while we were going to the restrooms, this was the time when we could socialize in a way. We met other girls from different blocks. We didn't know who is there, who is not, who went to the guest chamber, who was left behind, who went somewhere else, because Auschwitz was divided in different camps. I went to Birkenau. Mostly these people came to Birkenau, but still we didn't know who came and who is not and who is alive. So on the way we met the people, all, and hi, how are you? Are you here? What happened to your parents? And this and this. This is the way we could communicate. Otherwise we had to stay in the block, in the barrack. I happened to be with people, doctors, women doctors and nurses, which worked in the ghetto. We were 180 people in this barrack. Actually, the time when I came, Birkenau was a transit camp. The people which they had to take to the gas chamber, they took immediately, and the ones, the very young ones, and able to work, after 3 days, they sent them to different camps, either concentration camps or branches of concentration camp, labor camps. Somehow I stayed about 4 weeks in Birkenau. And it was close to the Jewish holidays. We didn't know if it's holiday, if it's day, if it's night, what day. We didn't know a thing. I didn't know the date. All I knew is the last time I came here was August 28, 1944, and I didn't we counted the days, so we could figure out approximately. But there were some people, I don't know how, maybe through the people which were there a longer time, they had some calendar or they knew. Maybe these people which worked there a longer time, from the people which arrived when they brought all their possessions. The possessions were, you know, they had special rooms where they searched everything, all the clothes. They took out all the jewelry, and they separated books and clothes and shoes and all kinds of things. So maybe somebody found a calendar, and this is how they knew. But one day, on a Friday, I saw they brought in 2 candles, and afternoon towards evening they said it's Eve of Rosh Hashanah, and they are going to light candles, and they are going to make the prayers. I was shocked. I couldn't believe it. How could they know? How could they get candles? But this was true. They brought candles, and they were starting making prayers. And suddenly I became very, very ill. Just shortly before they lit the candles, I was shivering, and I was so sick, and I felt I was burning. Then I was very friendly with one of the young women doctors, and she took me across, was an ambulance, a little hospital, and she took me there. And when I came, they took my temperature. They sent her back. They took my temperature, and they said, right away, they said, after 2-3 hours, that I have scarlet fever. And if I have scarlet fever, they have to take me to a special quarantine, because this is a contagious disease. So I was thinking right away, the special quarantine will be the gas chamber, because what do they need here quarantine for? What? They take healthy people to the gas chamber. What are they going to do with people with diseases? What was the reason for keeping people with contagious diseases? I really cannot answer. All I know is they took me the following morning to a different camp. They call it the gypsy camp. They were gypsies, which had the same treatment as Jews. All were annihilated. They had very few gypsies left. They were burning them just like Jews. And they brought me there to a little hospital. When I came in, everybody spoke Polish there. There were 2 prisoners, women, but they were from Poland, from Lodz. And I felt a little bit at ease because I could communicate. I mean, I could say a few words in my native language to them. And then they were little, very young kids. I mean, girls from 12 till 18. The oldest person there was maybe 19 years old, but it began from 12.
And how old were you then?
I was, let's see, 16 when the war broke out. I was about 18, 19 years old. They put me on a second-story bank, a second bank, you know, they had banks. And I was so terrible weak, and I was running such a terrible fever that I could never walk down to the bathroom. I was falling down. I was just crawling. And one day when I walked down, this time I didn't fall, I just walked down, and I look in the window, and I took a look in the window, and I couldn't believe in what I saw before my eyes. I saw myself, and I just couldn't believe that this is me. It was just a completely different person. I didn't have hair. I was terrible pale, and big circles under my eyes. And I started to feel so sorry for myself. I said, I can't believe it's this me. It was just terrible. Anyhow, I was in this hospital for about 4 weeks. During this time, every few days, I could see through the window wagons were coming in, black, big trucks covered with black, military trucks. You couldn't look inside. Everything was black outside. And when the trucks were coming in, Dr. Mengele, which was one of the doctors in Auschwitz, very famous, and he was the one which is responsible for sending all these people to the gas chamber. So he came in with his lieutenants, And we all had to go down from the banks, and they were looking at us. And then they picked at random people, the girls. Whoever they thought, I don't know if they were more sick. Everybody was practically sick equally. Maybe they were more skinny. I don't know what was their reason for picking them. So they picked certain girls, and they took them to a different room. And they took us to a different room, and the girls were standing there. We didn't know what will happen. After they kept us in the other room for a few hours. We didn't hear noise, nothing. It was very quiet. I don't remember the distance from the room where they took us out to the room they took us in, but we couldn't hear noise or screaming, nothing, quiet. When we came in, the bunks of the girls which they took away were made. The room was quiet, nobody was there. They took them away. Nobody said where, what, how. They disappeared. But we knew. Nobody said a word, nothing. And this was going on for 4.5 weeks, but every day was more than a year. It was just terrible. I was laying there in the fever. And I remember instead giving me medication, I used to get a half pill. A half pill, a half pill, a half pill. Very little food.
A half pill or
pill? A pill, P-I-L-L. A pill, a medicine.
Medical pill.
Mm-hmm. How does it sound? Pillow?
No, pill. I didn't know what, excuse me, I didn't know for sure.
I do the best I can.
That's all right. That's all right.
Mm-hmm. One day, after being there for about 4 weeks, there was a terrible commotion in the hospital, and they were telling us the hospital is being evacuated. It was such a big commotion that hundreds and hundreds of bottles of medicine were laying on the floor, and everything was such a rush, and they were taking out people, putting on trucks. And one of the women doctors walked over to me and says to me, go into the room where they're giving clothes. You're getting out from here. You're getting out with the ones which are being released. As they are already, they went through the quarantine already. It means I am well enough to go back as a regular prisoner. So I said to the doctor, I still run high fever. She says, don't say a word, just do what I am telling you. Which was my luck that she told me to do this. I was very lucky. I mean, God was with me. Probably my parents were praying for me. I don't know, their souls. Because you had to be there 6 weeks, otherwise you carry germs. And the Nazis were very, very careful about cleanliness and spreading germs. Terrible. Before I went to the room to get the clothes, I picked up a bottle of pills. Somehow I knew which pill I am getting. The color, I said, this must be the pills. And I took a jar of pills with me. I said, just in case, I will take the pills because I run fever still. So I take more pills. And I kept the pills, nobody saw, and I got the clothes. And they put us on the trucks, and we went back to Birkenau. I thought I'm going to the barrack back where I came from. But instead going to the barrack, they brought the ones which were supposed to be already healthy, they brought us back to another hospital. Being there in the hospital, in the evening in Birkenau, they took our temperature, and most of the girls did not have temperature because they were already 6 weeks in the hospital and they were already well. Well, to a certain degree that they didn't carry the disease. Nobody was well there. And when they asked me to, luckily nobody looked at my thermometer, but they came over and they said, did you have fever? I said, no, but I had very high fever. And when I saw I had this high fever, I took 10 pills in one time. I took the pills and water as much as I can drink. And the following morning I didn't have fever anymore. Then they released me with the other girls, and they sent us to another camp. This was a working camp in Auschwitz, where the trains are coming. This was a station where again, it was not a station, but they had the rails there. And they told us they are going to send us to Germany to work. But we had to wait. They said, well, 24 hours, maybe longer. But at this time, they said, you're going to work, you will get warmer clothes, and you will get a loaf of bread, and you will get some jam. So they put big tables with coats. All these clothes was taken away from the people which arrived, you know. This was our clothes, all the prisoners' clothes. But nevertheless, all tables with clothes, all tables with shoes, and all tables with dresses. And I got a coat, a long warm coat, a dress, a pair of boots, and then they gave us striped jackets and striped hats, the uniform. And they gave me a number. My number was 700. The number was right here on the left side. But the trains didn't come. Not after 1 day, not after 2 days, not after 3 days. This was October 1944. Now I know, but before I didn't know. October 1944, the Nazis, the Wehrmacht was losing on the Russian front. They knew they are losing the war already. This was just 3 months before the Russians liberated Eastern Europe. This was October, they liberated them beginning of January. It was a very short time. So they knew, but even though they knew the Jewish question to annihilate the remainder of the remaining part of the Jews, this had priority, even before the front. So in order to send the trains to the front, for the needs of the soldiers, they sent the trains to pick us up and go with the trains to Germany. This is why we had to wait 3 days for the trains. But actually they needed the trains. They didn't send it to the soldiers. They sent the trains to pick up the Jews, to send them to Germany. And while we were waiting the 3 days, I was with 2 other girls on one bunk sleeping, and they gave us 1 soup daily without a spoon, without a fork. So we took a few sips. Each one took a little sip of this watery soup. And somehow we survived the 3 days. And then when the train came, they put us in the cattle trains, and we went to Germany, supposedly. We didn't know where we were going to the working camps. This was the story, we were going to the working camps. On the way, we were talking, we were worrying, we didn't know where we were going, what is going to be, how long it will take to the destination. We knew we were going through Czechoslovakia because we stopped in Morawa Ostrawska. And some Czech people were screaming, this is Morawa Ostrawska. And they threw some carrots in. They knew who is coming, and they threw in some carrots for us. And from Czechoslovakia, we went to Austria. And from Austria, we went to Oberbayern, and we arrived in a city of Lenzing, a very, very beautiful city surrounded with Alps. When we walked down from the train, we couldn't believe our eyes. I never saw mountains, because where I come from, we didn't have mountains. Here we came out in this cold, cold morning, and we saw beautiful Alps with snow peaks on top, and beautiful homes carved in the mountains, beautiful views, and SS women and SS men were waiting for us, older SS men. These were Austrian people. These people were drafted in Austria to the SS because they spoke a little different accent, and they were older people, the men, the SS men. And they had dogs, they had machine guns, and the women were dressed just like SS women in Germany. Then they asked us, they didn't know where we come from. They knew they are getting people for work. We were 500 women, 410 Hungarian women, and 90 girls from Poland. So they said, where do you come from? How come you look like this? So we told them where we came from. And they took us to a place called Lenzing. It was a city which was converted to factories during the war. The whole city was factories. This was Lenzing Zellwollefabriken. These were factories which were manufacturing fabrics for German, for Nazi uniforms, and sheets, linens, and etc. And mostly the people which were working there were slave workers from Europe. And the majority of people were not people from concentration camps. They were in labor camps there. So we were 500 concentration camp prisoners being sent to this factory. Going to the place where they're supposed to give us our quarters, we were marching through forests, miles and miles and miles and miles, and then we saw in the forest thousands and thousands and 10,000s of barracks, and then we saw outside people were standing. So we could understand that these are where we could see, because we recognize how Polish people look and how Russian look and how other people look. We could see that these are people which they send away for work, but they were not in concentration camps, they were in working camps. In other words, they were free to move around freely, and they were not surrounded with any wires, and they were not watched. They were watched in a way, but it was not slave camps. So they were looking at us because we were the slaves, the way we looked, and they matched us with the dogs and with the machine guns and with the SS people. So they knew that we are people from concentration camp, but they were not allowed to say a word to us. No, they were just looking and shaking with their head. And then we came to a place, it used to be before a factory, and they converted this factory, and these were our quarters in this factory. They had shower rooms, but the water was ice cold. We didn't have any water, and it started to be very, very, very cold, and we had to wash ourselves with this water. And then they had the bunks inside. Two girls had to share one bunk, and we had like 2 rows of bunks, and in the middle was a little stove. And then they made groups, and they started to send out these groups to work. In the morning, everybody had to get up very early. They counted us outside. The same, similar routine as in Birkenau, but it was a little bit more modified. It didn't last so long because we had to go to work. And then they made them in like 7, 8 in a row, and we started to march. We marched in the middle. The SS men with the dogs and machine guns on the side, and the SS women beside them. And every morning, from the place where we marched out, they were homes where civilian people were living, Austrian people. They could see what's going on. Every day you had a show. 500 women prisoners are walking with the guards every single day. So everybody saw. They couldn't say we didn't know, we didn't see, because we were just in the heart of the village where people lived. And they saw what's going on. But nobody budged, nobody said a word, nobody came close. We were just on our own, surrounded with the Nazis and with the dogs and with the machine gun. We did not have electric wires. There were 3 rows of very tall wires, but they were not electric wires, because it used to be a factory before, and it seems they didn't have time to put up the electric wires. It was already towards the end of the war. And we marched several miles to the city of Lansing, because these were the suburbs. Lansing was all factories, and the people were living in the forests and outside the city. So the march took a good hour and a half at least, and it started to snow. You know, winter comes very early to Austria. This was Oberdonau, you know. It's much colder there in October already. It's just as cold as here back east in the winter. Snow was falling already, big snow, and here we were walking, marching, and the majority of us had wooden soles, and the snow was sticking to the soles, and people were falling, and it was just terrible. And when the people were falling, they were pushing them and beating them up. And finally we came to the factory. But somehow, God was with me. Do you want me to change the subject to something else? No. Somehow God was with me all the time. But in this case, I was not lucky enough to go to the factory to work. They took a group of 31 people, 31 women, and we were, they call it a commando, a group, which were digging ditches in the camp, in the forest, where the slave workers were, the people which came from Europe, Russian prisoners of war, Poles, which were forced to labor, Italian, French, Yugoslavian, Hungarian, from all Belgium, from Holland, from all over Europe, you had workers there. They were over 100,000. So I worked there with 30 women digging ditches because they needed to put some electric wires through. And the ground was very, very hard. We had to dig and dig and dig and dig. And snow was falling and rain was falling, and we had to stay and work all day long. And the day when it was a lot of snow, a lot of rain, we came back, our clothes was completely soaked, and there was no other clothes to change. Then we tried to take off the clothes and dry it on the little stove, but we were so many girls, so the stove could take so much. So we can't change one day this one put on, one day this. But in the morning I got up and my clothes was still wet, and I still had to wear these wet clothes until it, so we were lucky sometimes it snowed again, so it got more wet. And sometimes it didn't snow, so it took a few days until it dried on our bodies. And we did not realize there were other camps. We thought we are the ones which are here to work. We didn't know what was going on. We didn't know the war is going to an end. But once in a while, we had foremen, German older people, Nazis, not in uniform, and they were, you know, they were directing the work, what people should do and this and this. Once in a while they were throwing in, you know, oh, his son was killed on the front and this and this. One of them used to say sometimes, because he was angry, his sons were killed, you know, on the front. He said, well, maybe it won't take long, you know. He used to throw in a word here and there. But in the last week, somehow you could feel in the air something was going on. First of all, when the girls were going to work, and the other workers were working not far from them, even though each group of our people in the factory, I didn't experience this because we were digging the ditches 30 together, and we had a few SS men and a few SS women, a few of these German foremen with us. But we did not have contact with any other people. But the girls which worked in the factories, they saw the other workers, and they knew more because they were more free. So they used to slip through a little note to them, and it said, the war is going to the end, And this and this, sometimes they give them a cigarette, sometimes they give them a piece of apple or a piece of bread. They were lucky enough to get these contacts in the front of the Nazis, but somehow they did it while they worked. Let's say they put something in the machine. With the machine came out a little note, and we knew something is going on. Towards the end, we didn't get food. And I cannot begin to tell you what was going on. It was just terrible. We were walking out, and we were picking grass, and we were picking anything. The grass was already bare. There was nothing to pick anymore. This was going on for 3 days. And the Nazis ran away. We were left alone. But you couldn't, the camp was locked. You couldn't get out. There were tremendous gates, tremendous walls. But when we looked outside, we saw other people watching us. These were Hungarian Nazis, the Panther Brigade. When the Nazis ran away, the Hungarians, which were this was a special battalion which was fighting with the German Wehrmacht, and they were standing there. The Nazis sent them, and they stood there watching us with machine guns. We couldn't go out still. Until one day, in the evening, the Hungarians were still outside in Hungarian uniforms. We didn't see any tanks, nothing. We just saw an American, over 6 foot young man walked in, blond, tall. We didn't see tanks, nothing. He just walked in, and what he saw, he started to cross himself. And he couldn't speak English, but we could see that this is a different uniform. This must be, we didn't know if he's English, if he's American. And right after he walked out, and then we ran outside and we saw a few tanks, just a few, maybe 3. And we saw US, it was on the tanks. Then we started to scream, American soldiers are here, we are free. What they did is they ran into their tanks, and they brought in the rations of their food. And we started, everybody's got a little bit food, they didn't have too much. And then after this, this was like it was not a fort, how do you call it? It's like when the brigade is approaching a certain city, and then they have to, like a forefront of the army, right? And after this, it took all night. They were just the 3 tanks in this particular spot. You didn't see anything else. Afterwards, the Americans were driving in with their tanks, and they told us you are free, and they brought in food, and they opened the gates, and they opened the doors, and we could go out. We could go out. Where can you go? Right away, you could see they opened the windows in the factories, and we could see rays of sun coming in. And they didn't have, you didn't have stores there, nothing. And they had just the food which they had, military food, cans mostly and so on. They didn't carry supplies. They didn't know there is going to be a camp. Because later on, while we were there, we didn't know. We were a branch of the concentration camp Mauthausen. Mauthausen was the main camp, and they had so many different camps around, labor camps. And we were one of the labor camps, a branch of Mauthausen. Later on, after the war, when I came to visit Mauthausen several years ago, and they have a brochure, they gave me my brochure, and I found in the brochure, I knew it before, but actually I found evidence, Lansing was one of the branches of Mauthausen, and this is where I was. So after 2 days, the American Red Cross, the army, a unit of the army, but the Red Cross took over charge of us. And they established, is it late?
We have about 5 more minutes.
Okay.
But if you need it, we will get another roll. We can then
Okay, well,
after
it's
this roll.
It's up to you. Yeah.
So please continue.
Yeah. So is it already so fast? I still have, yeah. Is that so?
No,
Time
if necessary, we'll give you more time. But
Okay.
this roll may need to be replaced.
So they did not have their own food. You know, they gave us all the supplies they could, which was wonderful. All the cans, you know, everything was gobbled up immediately. And they opened a little ambulance because some girls were in such terrible shape they couldn't eat. They had diarrhea. And some of them died there because they overate. So they made a little ambulance and they took in all these people which were very weak and very sick, and they started to feed them with a different diet. Now, every morning they went out to the villages and brought in fresh food for us. Fresh milk, fresh eggs, fresh chicken, fresh everything fresh. And they established their own military kitchen, and they cooked for us. So we had a very good food, breakfast, lunch, dinner. And they posted military personnel around the factory, around the camp, MPs, military personnel. Nobody was allowed to get into the camp because they were, you know, they were watching. We were young women. No harm should be done to us. And then we saw all these slave laborers were coming down here because they were free too, and they knew we were, you know, this was a concentration camp, and they all came to see us, but they couldn't get in. It was all military police, and we were watched. And later on, they took us in the army trucks, and they took us with American flags, and we were driving through the whole city free. It's just unbelievable. And thousands and thousands of people, including these slave workers, everybody was piled in the trucks, and we were driving around for days. It was unbelievable. And being there, okay, so have to stop.
Very good. Let's stop now.
Okay.
Take a break. They'll put in a new roll.
You know what is Wasser? Water.
Yeah.
100 water.
Stand by. All right.
Okay, I can start?
No, not yet.
Okay.
Okay. We are ready to start, so please continue where you left off, and then later on you'll tell us more about
where we were left off. I will never forget the wonderful, tender care we received from the American Red Cross. It's just unbelievable what they didn't do to us. Really, they took care of us like family take care of children. Wonderful care, wonderful. So they established a kitchen in the camp. It was no more camp, we were free, but we didn't have room where to go, and the American occupied forces did not have a tendency to evacuate families, Austrian or German families, in order to accommodate us. These were civilized people, and they set an example to the free world how people behave. So we stayed in the camp, naturally under different conditions. We had soap and we had water, and I received 6 pair of shoes and fabric for blouses and skirts, and right away we looked civilized, really. And we had very good food, slowly. They didn't give us fattening things, you know. They had special dietitians to feed us. And the very sick ones were in a special hospital, little hospital. And we stayed there about 10 days. After 10 days, they evacuated us about 15, 20 miles away to the most beautiful resort. And they had a beautiful lake there. They call it the Attersee. The lake was surrounded with the Alps, the most beautiful view in the world to me.
Can I ask you, what did you feel like when you came after everything you'd been through and you
I felt elated. I knew I lost my parents. I didn't count on them. My brothers ran away on the Russian side. They were not in concentration camp. So I had a ray of hope. Maybe my brothers were coming. But deep in my heart, I did not want to go back to Poland. I did not want to go back to this blood-soaked earth there. So I stayed on. First of all, I had to recuperate physically and mentally. Mentally, I was pretty good adjusted, I have to say. Just very sad in a way, but pretty good adjusted. And they took us to the most beautiful resort where Hitler Nazi Jugend had a summer camp. These were cottages in a forest, not far from the lake, surrounded with the Alps. I was always a nature lover. I loved beautiful views and geography. And when I saw this, I said, if there is paradise, it's probably it. And it is, the most beautiful part of the world. If you ever go there, you will see it. And we stayed there several weeks in this camp. Not camp, in this resort. And the same thing, military police surrounded the whole village. Outsiders could not get in because all other camps were open and people started to run out. I mean, they didn't tell you can come in and you can come out. When the Americans drove in and they liberated a city and they opened the camp, if you want, you are on your own. Go wherever you want. They didn't tell you, come 3 o'clock, come 4 o'clock, come 5 o'clock. Nobody went. There was no strength to go, no way to go, no place to go. But if you want, you are on your own. For our own sake, we stayed on, just to recuperate. So we stayed there under very, very good conditions. Again, they had their own kitchen for us. And once a week we had a dance. They played the band. And the sad part of the story, we couldn't communicate with the soldiers. We didn't know how to speak English, so we were signs, We made signs and we could dance, but we couldn't communicate. There were some girls from Hungary and from Austria. They spoke English. And as a matter of fact, one of the girls which was with me in the camp from Vienna, she married the lieutenant of the American Red Cross, and I remember his name. His name was Mr. Chive. So this Mr. Chive took me and 2 other girls, a delegation, to another camp. They brought a list of other former prisoners and how to get in touch with other people, So this way people found each other. And I went to Ebensee, and this was the camp where my husband was. All the same girls was in the same camp. They didn't know each other at this time. And I went to Ebensee, and I couldn't believe my eyes what I saw there. Piles and piles and piles of bodies. And people, men walking around like skeletons. I saw an awful lot during the war and in the ghetto. In Auschwitz, but what I saw there was just beyond description. I cannot describe this. The most awesome, the most cruel, the most horrible thing what I saw. Anyhow, we came in there to the office, and I brought a list of the women which survive in my camp, and they gave us a list of the people which are there, because the Germans. Everything was very much organized, very precise. Every name was listed. So we exchanged lists. And some of the girls found their brother or a husband or so on. And after a while, another group went, and one of my friends from the camp met my husband. She knew him from before the war, and she told him, there is a lot of people, some of the people from your hometown, why don't you come over someday for a visit? And he came with another guy one day to visit. They had to get a special pass to go in. You just couldn't get in, because a lot of men after the war, you know, you never know. Everything was beautifully organized, just magnificent. So we stayed there in the fresh air, and girls, people started to gain weight a little bit, and started to be stronger from day to day. It's amazing how a person can, especially young people, what good nutrition and peace and surroundings, how it can influence a person. They started to come back to life just like a flower. Mm-hmm. Every day a little bit better, a little bit better, a little bit better. And they started to look human already. Hair started to grow and nice, and people started to make plans what to do. Some tried to go back home to Hungary or to Poland, and some didn't want to go back, like me. I planned to go abroad. I had relatives here in South America, in the United States, in South America, in United States, and I said, I will try to get in touch. I don't know how, but I have enough. I'm not going back then. I have to start a new life, and so on. And then my husband came, and I started to date. In the beginning, I wasn't interested to date steady, really, because I was very, I made up my mind, and I was very, very serious about it, just to travel abroad on my own and just start new, get in touch with my relatives. But then I started to date my husband, and I changed my mind, it seems. And at this time, the Jewish brigade, the Haganah, came to our camp. The Haganah was the Palestine brigade attached to the English. And they were the ones which tried to take out the people which survived the camps to bring them illegally to Israel. And I changed my mind to go to the States, and I decided I will go to Palestine with my husband. And we were already on our way. We came to Italy, and we were waiting to get a ship, because they didn't have ships. They have to organize ships, buy ships. And this was in 1945, in August, end of August. I was 6 weeks in Italy, waiting to go to Palestine. And after 6 weeks, I met some people, a friend of ours, who left before World War II. He graduated from school, got his diploma, and went to Israel, and he became an officer in the army. At this time was Palestine. And he found out in Italy through somebody that I am alive, and I am in Italy, in this place, and he came to see me. It was quite a reunion. And at this time, while I was in Italy, my brother came from Russia, and he was in the Polish army, which liberated Eastern Europe. And he came home to see me, to see the parents and the family in end of December 1944, beginning of January, before even they liberated our city, but the Nazis already ran away. My brother got a special permit from General Rokossowski. He was a lieutenant in the army, and he walked about 20 miles with his machine gun, his uniform, to come home. There was nothing. And then he came to the city of Lodz. He was stationed there. And the people which were liberated by the Russians, they didn't have the the tender, loving care as we did. They let them out and they were free on their own. So everybody came back to his hometown to see whom he can find. This was the point where everybody gathered, and they had a Jewish community and everybody registered, and this is how people found each other, because everybody was dispersed. And my brother met some people which were in Auschwitz, and they were girls which were with me. And they told him, you cannot count on your sister, she had scarlet fever, and they burned down this whole hospital, she's not there anymore. So naturally he was terrible, sad, he was crying day and night, because we were extremely close. And finally one day he got news, some boys came from Italy, that they met a mutual friend who is an officer in the Haganah, and he sends news that I am alive. And he just couldn't believe it. And later on, when I wrote a letter to him, and the guy brought the letter, he says, well, it's a nice letter, but this is not my sister. My sister is not alive. He couldn't believe it. After he had details, because I was to the last moment with these people which saw me, what was going on. He says, no, she's not alive. But being in Italy, after 5.5, 6 weeks, we were kind regimented there, because we were kind prepared to go to Palestine, and life at this time there was not easy. So they prepared us to be more regimented, to, like in the kibbutzim, you know, more communal work and everything done together and so on. But after a few weeks and being in camp and getting to know this type of life, we realized that really this is not what we like. This won't fit with the lifestyle we like to lead. We did not plan to have a bed of roses immediately. We knew you are alone, you don't have anything, and you have to stand on your own feet, you have to work. But somehow this type of communal life did not appeal to us, and we changed our mind.
Too much, you couldn't get over the effect of camp life.
I did not like the camp life, and we made our mind up, and we turned around. Naturally, you were free. After the war, you were free, whatever you did, with being whoever took care of you, either the Haganah or the Palestine Brigade or whoever, you are free. You don't want to take it, you just leave it. And after 6 weeks, we turned around and we went back to Germany. We really didn't know where we were going. Oh, we picked a city. Maybe we go to Stuttgart. We knew there is a lot of people in Stuttgart, you know, people who survived the camp. Maybe here, maybe there. I told my husband-to-be, I said, well, we pick a nice city. I don't like to go to ugly cities. And all these people, you see, my story is maybe different than other stories, because I was liberated in a camp with 500 women, but there were camps with 50,000 and 30,000, and the occupied forces, we were occupied by United States forces, some were occupied by English, some were liberated by French. So each territory had different rules, you know, and they could do for the ex-prisoners so much. When you approach 500 people, you can give them different care. When you approach 40,000, it's much more difficult, and their conditions were different too. So they could help them in a certain way, like they couldn't help us. To us, it was easier, you know. So we had more care. If you have to disperse charity for 50,000 people, or you have to disperse for 500, so the 500 get more. So our experience was much, besides being free, the experience of being really taken care of with such attention was much more, much more. And it was much easier to get rehabilitated, you know. The shock was not so great. It was
even so.
After the war.
The
the shock was great to a way. to pleasantness more, because every day was getting better. Every day was better and better and better. So anyhow, coming back to Germany, after being in Italy, this is a very interesting part of my story. All the people which survived the camps didn't have money, didn't have means, didn't have a place where to go. You couldn't go into a German and kill him and throw him out, because the military government, the American military government, did not allow this. We don't go tooth for a tooth. We are a civilized country, and their rules were civilized rules, even though the Nazis were the way they were, but we cannot go down to their level. Our levels were the American levels, and the free world levels were different than the Nazis. So you couldn't go to somebody and kill him and throw him out, even though they were Nazis. You did not have a right. The law had to be taken care. The American occupied forces, they had to take law in their hands. Otherwise it would be a revolution. People would be killed. They would kill each other on the streets. Anyhow, so, excuse me, I have to finish. Okay. So all these people had to be in different camps again. I don't know what was there before, but the people were concentrated in open camps, waiting what is going to be with them. In the meantime, the Jewish agencies stepped in, like the UNRWA and the Hayas and the Joint. UNRWA was from United Nations Rehabilitation Agency. And then we had the Jewish groups were coming, also military, but they were connected with the Joint and with the Hayas. And this was already, they brought help too. So everybody could do so much. There were tens of thousands of people. They couldn't supply everybody. So all together did help them. But for the time being, they were concentrated again in a camp. It was a free camp, but we are again in a camp. And when I saw a camp, I was running. I couldn't take it. I hated it. So we came there on the way going. We picked a city because we came back from Austria, from Italy, with some boys which were in Stuttgart, Germany, and they were traveling back and forth. So they told us there is a lot of people, survivors in Stuttgart. It's a nice city, and how about going to Stuttgart? We said, fine, we will go to Stuttgart. But on the way we stopped, there was a big camp of the people which were liberated, Feldafing, not far from Munich. And we met some people which we knew, and they said, why don't you stay here? I said, no, I didn't tell them the reason. But I just couldn't stand camp life at all. It was just too much. Here I am liberated, I'm free, and I'm going to be in a camp again, a free camp. I don't want camp. The word camp was murder to my ears. Just couldn't take it. So anyhow, we met a man, a friend of my husband from before the war, and he says they live in a city not far from Munich. It's a small, beautiful city. It's a city of churches, and miracles happen in this city. It's an old, beautiful city. And there is 120 survivors, which they survived different camps, around, also working camps, and they gathered in this city, and they live in the military government took a hotel, you see, legally. Everything was done legally. They resettled the Nazis which owned the hotel, they emptied it, and they resettled the survivors in this hotel. There were 120 people. And when we came, we had to register. They couldn't register new people, there was no room. It was not easy. You can stay, but where are you going to stay? Then it's again a problem. In the American military officials were working with the new German officials. They were ex-Nazis or they were new Nazis, but new Germans, they were not Nazis at this time, maybe before they didn't know Hitler and the Nazis were dead. There was a new Germany. Then they had to bring representatives. Later on, this is a different subject, how the Nazis were Nazis, rehabilitated. But they had to work with officials from Germany. Somebody had to, had to co-work with them because there were certain part of administrations that the American occupied forces couldn't do it themselves. They had to work with the Germans somehow. So it was very difficult to register in a small city. You could register if I would go to the camp where they have 10,000 people, 8,000 people.
What was the name of that little small city?
Altetting.
Altetting.
A-L-T-O-T-T-I-N-G. But the O has two dots on the top. Altetting, Oberbayern. And this was a city of miracles, you know. People used to come miles and miles and miles away with crosses, and they were crawling on their knees around a holy place where miracle used to happen. And in the morning the church bells were ringing, and they had beautiful museums, the panorama, you know, the birth of Christ, excellent museum, marvelous. It was a very cultured, beautiful city, and lots of trees, and it was really calm. It was a calmness took me around when I came there. It was good for my soul to be in these surroundings. When I saw camp, I can come, I can visit for a day. I couldn't stay.
Please forgive me for
now you can.
interrupting you, but we have very little time, and I want to know whether you ever saw your brother again.
I will come to this.
But we only have a few more minutes.
A few more minutes. I will make it fast.
Okay.
One of the boys, people were traveling all the time, legally or illegally. In the beginning, it was not so hard, even to go on the Russian side. So one of the boys, which lived in the hotel with 120 people, went to Poland. And he met my brother. And he told him, I knew he's going to Poland, and I knew where my brother is in the city. And I said, this is the letter, and you just go there, and you just tell him I'm here. In the beginning, he didn't believe it. He crossed his heart, he cried, he swore, he's there. But my brother couldn't see me. He was an officer, a big officer in the Russian army, Polish army. But when he found out I'm alive, he wrote letters to the general that he wants to come and see me, he wants to retire from the army, and so and so. And one day he ran away. He deserted. He deserted, and he was already in the forest where they caught him. And my brother would be killed immediately for desertion. But somehow he ran away in a forest so deep, and he stood there a few days, and he twisted his ankle. And when he came back to the army, he says he rode a horse, and he twisted his arm, because they didn't know whom they were chasing. So he stopped doing this, and he says if he will leave the army, he will leave legally, and he wrote a letter. He went to Warsaw to the big general. He told him he lost the whole family and this, and by miracle he was released, and he came legally with a transport to Germany, and I got a wire one day that he is in this camp in Germany with the people which came from the Russian side. Also, this was also arranged with the Haganah. The Haganah were pulling out people from the Russian sides, from all the sides. They were interested to bring as many people to Palestine as possible. And I came into this camp. It was by the Czechoslovakian border. So they were sleeping in tents. There were thousands and thousands of people. I came. He came with his fiancée, with his wife to be. This is the first time I met her. And immediately, my husband was at this time in Munich. I took a taxi with somebody else because he had somebody else too. And I told the driver, you drive fast. It took us maybe 3/4 of a day to come there. And right away I took them out, and I brought them there to Altetting. And we have one huge room, and they stayed with us for 3 months.
Your brother and his wife?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And after this, in the meantime, my husband made contact with his family here, and we already had papers coming to United States. But so many people, at this time the quotas were very much restricted, and they let in 100,000 survivors. And even so, we had all the papers necessary. They stopped the immigration. We had to wait 3 years on our luggage. In the meantime, my brother went back to Poland, and he started some business there. And from Poland, he went to Israel. and from Israel, I brought them here, and we are together.
In Los Angeles.
And we are always together. The best, he's my brother. They ask me if I have wonderful friends, but my best friend is my brother. We are one. Wonderful, wonderful. And I'm very lucky, I'm happy. Very.
2 more minutes.
Yeah.
You have 2 more minutes. You
Fine.
want to tell us some more?
Oh,
if you're
tell you some more. Well, we came here and
about your family right now, your husband, your children.
yeah, I have one
What you
daughter. I have one daughter, and she was a school teacher. Right now, she's getting her master's in family therapy, and she's a lovely young lady, very pretty. And I'm very, very lucky. I have my family. I count my blessings. The little family I have in this whole world. I have one cousin in Israel, first cousin, and I have two stepbrothers, which I knew them not too much because they were abroad all the time. One is in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and one lives in France. They have beautiful families. We saw each other. They visit me, and I visit them. But my closest person in this world, besides my own immediate family, is my brother. And he's a great source of my comfort and my strength.
And he reminds you of everyone else.
We have a lot in common, and we talk a lot about the past, which I don't like to talk with anybody else. And we talk about the present and the future, and he's a lot of strength to me. Because I'm very private.
Thank you very, very much.
No, I like to add, even
Yes.
if it takes 2 minutes, I
Yes.
hope that is enough.
All right.
I like to add my sincere thanks to the faculty of UCLA for helping us, the 1939 Club, to go through with this project of taping the story of the Holocaust so the future generation will know about this, what we went through, and they will fight bigotry and they will learn about it, how free people should respect each other and there should be a better world for the future generation. I also like to thank my interviewer, Dr. Morris Beckwith, for the wonderful cooperation and kindness, and Dr. Janet Haddad. Thank you very much.